So yeah, we're recording.
Yeah. Okay. So, when we talked about it last week, we said that we would maybe start by talking about what we actually mean by sustainability. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, let's start there. Yeah, and see
Yeah.
where it goes. I'm
Okay.
very excited, by the way. I just want to tell you, I'm very excited about this.
Good. Good.
I'm
So am I.
buzzing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had my ice bath, uh, and a bunch of other things, so
Okay.
I'm ready
You're ahead
to
of
ready
me.
to go.
I did have
Yeah,
my cold shower, but and I have not been keeping up with Vanita on her ice baths recently.
yeah. Well, it's cold. It's that time of the year.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll stick to the ice baths when it's summer,
Yeah. That's
and
it.
it's
My August ice baths.
all right. So do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, the
What
reason
is sustainability?
yeah, exactly. And I wanted to start here, partly because it's been on my mind a lot recently, but also just because I think it's kind of fundamental that, part of what we want to talk about on this podcast is sustainability. And I see people all the time talking about sustainability and then saying we need to improve sustainability communications, we need to get people to care more about sustainability. And then it's like, yeah, but what is it? Like, and and not just what is it, but probably more importantly, why do we care about whatever we think it is?
Yeah,
Um,
just to define two things.
yeah, exactly. Because I think once you get under the skin, you actually find there's a whole bunch of stuff underneath there that can quite significantly shift your perspective on some of the details. Because we're all so focused on the how, like, oh, we need to reduce carbon emissions, and that means X, Y, Z. But if you don't know actually what it is you're really trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it, then you can't really decide whether or not these solutions are the right solutions or not. They might well be, but you have no like
The
foundation to judge it upon.
a lot of the hows as well can serve different masters.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you have to be careful, like which how you're supporting, and if it really will get you to where you want it to be.
exactly. Yeah. So maybe I'll just throw the ball over to you for a minute then. When you say you care about sustainability, what do you think you mean?
I mean, I don't know. There's a very deep article I've written about it, which I know you've read, and I do plan on publishing it. But it's hard to really summarize that in a couple of minutes. It's one of those things you have to like. I don't know if I could summarize it, to be honest with you. But I've been thinking about this as well because one of the things I don't think we've really spoken about, and one of the ways I think about, and I don't know if I'm talking about sustainability or the prerequisite to whatever we are describing as sustainability. But I have this spectrum. I call it the spectrum of power.
Yeah.
I think maybe I have kind of had a casual conversation about it with you, but um, the way I think about the world is there's two forces at play. There is the force that works to concentrate power into as few as hands as possible, and there's the force at play to dilute power into as many hands as possible. And when you look at I don't know if what I'm doing is describing sustainability or describing a situation that you need before you can really explore sustainability. But when I think about a lot of the problems that we have right now, it's predominantly driven by the fact that there are a few actors with a lot of power to do whatever they want. And the way we need to combat that is to basically have a rebalancing of that power.
Yeah.
So have more effort kind of diluting power so to as many hands as possible. And so like and the reason I think about things that way is this is one of the rubrics by which I evaluate kind of when people raise sustainability solutions or this or that and the other, and I look at it and I think, well, hang on, you don't really have to squint too hard at what's being told to me right now to say, well, that solution is really just concentrating power into one entity, one organization, one person, at the expense of diluting the power to as many hands as many people as possible. Like we're oftentimes making this kind of Faustian bargains, which is like, oh, we can make the world more sustainable for you, but you're gonna have to give me something for that. You're gonna have to give me more control. You're gonna have to give me more money. You're gonna have to give me, but if you give me enough, I will make the world more sustainable for you. And we're oftentimes sold this bargain that I feel uncomfortable with. So maybe I can tell you, maybe what I'm trying to answer is what isn't sustainability. We're going the opposite way. What
Yeah.
isn't sustainability? I think what isn't sustainability are deals that we make that give more power or help concentrate power into as few hands as possible.
Yeah. Okay. So for you, you haven't used this word, but sort of like oppression of the masses by powerful elite is a problem.
That's true.
Oh God. Is that a fair summary?
I wouldn't even put it that way because I think because actually no, thank you for trying to like refine, like help understand my position exactly, and thank you for that. But because this is where I think the fallacy comes into play, which is we think when people talk about, and what I'm explaining is not like a new I haven't just invented this whole idea of like powerful and powerless, but I think where people have made the mistake in the past is they think about it as just a state. There is a powerful set of people, and then there is a powerless set of people, and we must fight the powerful set of people. And that's not how I think about it at all, because however powerful a person is or an entity is, there's always something bigger or more powerful than them. However powerless you feel, there's always somebody or some entity or some being that's less powerful than you. And it's not the fact that kind of powerful people are evil and powerless people are good. It's that what force are you working towards? Are you a force that is working towards the concentration of power? That's like your goal that's the game you're playing? Or are you a force? Are you on the side of the force that's working to dilute power? And that's kind of how I think about it. So it's not
Yes.
really like the oppression of the masses by an elite. Um, it's the selection. Are you on the side of oppression?
Yes.
Right? Are
Yeah.
you
And
side
it's
of
the direction of
oppression? Like
travel.
yeah, the direction of travel. And I think that's really important because I think we get lost in that, or that person or that entity is evil, and just because you're being victimized, you're good. And I don't think that's the
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, likewise, and I think we're all kind of products of our environment and products of history. And, we're kind of in the middle somewhere, living our middle class lives, but we could have been born extremely poor. We could have been
Yeah.
born into some very, very elite, wealthy family. And
Yeah.
our whole perspective and the life that we build would be based upon that starting point. And, I've met some people. I mean, I've never met like somebody who's like super elite, like a mega billionaire, but I've met some pretty rich people, and some of them are genuinely lovely human beings. They just happen to be very rich. Um, so, um,
I
yeah,
met some people who've grown up in pretty awful lives growing up and are not good eggs at
yeah,
all. So
yeah. We're all just
um,
trying to find our way through life from wherever we started from. Um, yeah. So this direction of travel of power and whether we're concentrating it or diluting it is a key thing for you. Um,
how does that land for you? Like, what's your thinking on this area?
Um, I mean, it makes sense. For me, I feel like there's one of the things that I've been thinking about recently in regard to this is the hierarchy of needs. And it's really interesting. A friend of mine, Patrick, um, he highlighted to me that in the Indian sort of Vedic system, you've got the chakras, and the chakras are not just a kind of spiritual concept. They also have a sort of more of a practical representation in terms of the hierarchy of needs of humanity, starting at the root of like your base need for like safety and sustenance and so on, and then rising up to the crown where it's like spiritual enlightenment. And he highlighted that it's interesting that Abraham Maslow, when he developed his hierarchy of needs, he apparently wasn't aware of the Indian chakra system, but they're almost identical. I mean, there's some like subtle differences between them, but they are almost identical. Which
there's some essential truth to this two mechanisms.
Yeah. And I think, it's become a popular concept because it does resonate with us on some deep level, that we know that like, we'd like to kind of have freedom of expression and to like explore the higher parts of ourselves. But first we need to make sure that we're safe and that we have water and that we have food and shelter.
Should we go through the chakras for the people that are listening, for the 10 people that are listening?
The 10 people that are listening, we'll go through the 7 chakras. I mean, can we remember them off the top of our heads? So the root chakra.
The root chakra, So the base.
It's the base, and you've got your kind of your sense of safety and so on goes with that. Then you have the sacral chakra, which is sort of around your belly button area.
I call it the willy chakra.
Yeah, because isn't that one more to do with sort of sexuality and so on, reproduction? Then you've got the solar plexus, which is just sort of at the bottom of your ribs, which is sort of the doing energy about sort of being able to create and bring things into the world.
A strength as well, isn't it? Bringing confidence to yourself. Yeah,
I'm sure someone will correct us in the comments.
I've got an entire book on how to fact check ourselves. I don't know where the book is.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Then you got the heart chakra, which is all about love and
loving yourself, loving others, like exploring.
Exactly. Yeah. Just sort of being in touch with your emotions. Then the throat chakra, which is about expression, being able to express yourself and actually communicate what you need to communicate. Then you have the third eye chakra, which is obviously sort of represented in loads of spiritual traditions, the sort of the Indian bindi on the head and so on. And to me, there's always been a bit of, just because my knowledge isn't deep enough, uncertainty around like the subtle difference between the third eye chakra and the crown chakra, because the third eye chakra is like insight, like but particularly sort of spiritual insight and so on. But then you have the crown chakra, which is on the top of the head, which is more about kind of greater enlightenment, I guess.
Maybe you haven't reached the crown.
That's it. I'll know it when I get there.
You just by definition of us doing this podcast, we've probably reached the throat chakra.
Right. Which is a very privileged place to be.
True. But so how's that? So map that to. Let's explore mapping that to kind of your sustainability in your paradigm. So like, it's sustainability to you is like society working its way through the chakra, or is it reaching a state of enlightenment? Or
I think for me, it's kind of a bit of both. So it's on the one hand trying to create a world in which everybody has their basic needs met. So a recognition of the fact that there is a hierarchy of needs, like they're not all equal, and that the base needs are sort of essential and the higher needs are nice to have. So creating a world in which everyone's base needs are met, and in which there is opportunity for everybody to pursue their higher needs should they want to, because not everybody wants to like pursue it, like
or maybe not
self-expression
at all
and so on.
Times in their life.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So for me, that would be philosophically a good place for a society to get to, and to be able to do that in a way that is respectful of the living world more broadly. And I use the term the living world. I've been thinking about this recently because I think we talk about nature and it's like, but we are, I don't know, we are part of nature. And how do you define nature? It's a kind of a strange thing. And then you talk about the earth and it's like, well, it's not just the earth. I mean, there's a lot of beings who are here with us. And also when you talk about nature, it's like, do we only care about wildlife or do we also care about, other forms of life that are not wild, right? Why do we care about the wild one more than the one that's apparently under our care, which is a paradox in itself. So
an interesting view on that as well, but yeah.
So the living world, I mean, at this point, I feel like it's kind of a term that is a reasonable catch-all for just acknowledging that there is a whole world of life and somehow life matters. Not everybody will agree with that. But I feel that somehow life matters and we're a part of it. Those two things for me kind of fit together, that we want to create a world for humans where we make sure that everybody has their base needs met, has the opportunity to pursue the higher needs, but also that we're respectful of the broader living world that we're a part of.
And I think this is one of the things, and again, with kind of the current sustainability narrative that I have caution with is, and it comes from like sustainability communications as well. It was like, make it about humans. Yeah. Make the sustainability story just about humans, because, that lands better with humans. Humans care about humans more than they care about other things. But that can't be it. If the story is sustainability is just about humans and making life better for humans, then there's plenty of ways in which humans are in suffering in the world right now, which has got nothing to do with the issues that we put our energy into, like climate change and all these other things. There's plenty of people that it's so far beyond what they would possibly care about. I need food on my plate tomorrow, or my children are going to starve. You care if the story of sustainability is a story of reducing human suffering, then all the things that we would be doing would not be the things that would prioritize, that. So that's one of the issues. Had a couple of others, but I think I've lost them now. But yeah, that's
I completely agree.
Human-centric,
If it's purely human-centric, if all we care about is human suffering, then our list of priorities would definitely put carbon emissions, climate change. It would be on the list somewhere, but it wouldn't be at the top of the list. War, starvation, those things would be right at the top of the list. And I think they should be in some ways, but I think that it's strange to me that they're not. It feels like sustainability is something that I've always thought is sort of a holistic thing, but actually in its strange way, when you actually look at it, it's quite reductionist, because it ignores lots of things that would seem important in terms of meeting both. Well, I mean, even if you just look at it from an environmental point of view, even things like war are terribly destructive. So, but if it is purely environmental, then you get into the question of like, well, why do we care about that so much?
But then you have to take away the human only aspect. So to move this conversation where we're moving it to now, we actually have to take the human only centric, like logically, we have to take the human only centric part out of it. And now you're asking the question, well, then that's the whole problem, isn't it? That's why the humans are in it. The human gives the why.
Yeah.
But if we take the humans out of it, like, what is the why? Like, why do we care about the environment?
Yeah, exactly. Why do we care about it if we are not putting ourselves in that picture? And maybe, on some level, I think some people just intuitively care about life. And can feel that there is a broader suffering that goes beyond humanity on this planet right now.
Well, are we? I suppose it all just comes down to, this selfish viewpoint. Not, I don't know if that's the right term, selfish, but this self-centered viewpoint of humans existing on this planet, and everything around us is there to serve us and our needs, and not really understanding that we are actually just as much as part of the ecosystem here as like a bee, as a tree. I think one of the really interesting things that we're starting to like discover a lot more these days is just how dependent we are on everything around us. And I don't just mean for our, I need, this table's made out of bamboo. I need bamboo to make a table. I mean, just like even inside your bodies. I mean, I think we've had this, we wouldn't be able to survive on this world if we didn't have this vast colonies of like microbiome that's all just working together in an internal ecosystem in symbiosis with it. And it's something that we've ignored many, many times, like the medicals. We don't really pay attention. They're now paying attention to it. So it's now like it's not just you. You would not survive even as an individual entity without this ecosystem around you and all this life and all this millions of years of evolution. And so we can't really survive without the world around us.
Yeah.
I'm into sci-fi, so I've watched my whole life of like, you can apparently just live in a spaceship surrounded with metal and just a couple of machines. But it's not true.
Yeah, I mean,
Or at least,
you look at the
yeah,
astronauts when they come back, how weak
yeah,
and depleted they are from
yeah,
being in that kind of sterile, isolated environment. I mean, gravity is part of that effect, but I
also, I
think it's
mean,
more than that.
yeah, I mean, there's some theories that you really couldn't travel humans beyond, um, the near Earth boundary because there's so much radiation out there. Like you just literally could not survive as a human being. I don't know. This is the edges of my knowledge of this
Yes.
area, but like there's a lot of kind of talk around, you just literally can't take the radiation. So we literally can't even survive outside this planetary boundary
Yeah.
that we've got here. So
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think we've just maybe we're at the tail end of it, of passing through a period of history where we thought we'd figured it all out. It's like we've cracked physics, and
uh,
now we
uh,
know how to dominate the natural world, and we can
yeah.
bend it to our will, make it do whatever we want. And then we realize that actually we don't really understand the complexity of it, and that by taking this very effective but mechanical view of like, okay, we understand how it works in this simple way, we're actually destroying it because we're ignoring all of the complexity that's sort of inherently embedded in it and all of the interrelationships between the parts.
I think when people think about kind of where we are right now in the world and all the steps that needed to get for us to get here, it's seen as an inevitability. Like this was the equation. This is the perfect answer to that equation of how you actually evolve as creatures on a planet. I read a really interesting book. I forgot the name of the book now. It's What is Life? It's by Mary Walker and Lee Cronin. So it's about assembly theory, which is this kind of this theoretical physics of life. Like how do you actually define, like what is, they were trying to answer in kind of, pure theoretical physics terms, like what actually is life? Like what is a definition of life? Because in the way she put it is, and it's very interesting, everything that can exist in this universe can never exist, you know? Like all the myriad of possibilities can never exist in the universe. There has to be a path that goes through it. And assembly theory kind of talks about basically you you can build some building blocks, but then the only thing you can build after that to the next thing has to be made up of the building blocks that you've already built.
Yeah.
And so the basis of a theory, what they're trying to do with that theory is, am I going on a tangent? I don't know. What they're trying to do with that theory is how can we detect life extraterrestrial life. We're always right now trying to detect extraterrestrial life by looking for what happened on Earth and, us, like we exist. So therefore, maybe all life in the universe, it's just kind of an arrogant assumption that we're perfect. We're the perfect expression of life.
We are the pinnacle of the universe's achievements.
Yeah, 2 arms ahead. We're the pinnacle. So obviously, if there's life that happens in another planet, it must be like us. And they're basically saying, nah, we could have turned out as like slime blobs, or floating creature. It just happens to be that the original assembling building blocks, like we just kind of came up from that. You're talking about how basically the Industrial Revolution, everything happened this way. We all figured out, here we are. We've got this science around us. This is where all life would end up if you just gave it the same starting points. You'd all end up here because we're winning, right? And what they're basically saying is, nah, you can go in any direction you want, and you just happen to have evolved a certain level of complexity, which allows you to kind of make screwdrivers and things like that. But we've evolved, but we shouldn't treat where we are right now as pinnacle. It's just one potential way we could have gone in this world. And so, this idea that we could have gone away, which doesn't. This was the point I was trying to make. We could have gone away, which doesn't do what you said, which doesn't do, okay, we're going to ignore nature. We're not going to be in partnership with it. We're going to strip away the earth. That's actually the only way you can actually build a society and become more evolved, is to actually be in combat with the environment that we're in. We could have just as comfortably, I think, grown a society which has lived in perfect harmony with nature. And it's not like I don't think that's easy to do now, because you have to have assembled all the pieces together. There's like path dependence to a lot of this stuff. But it doesn't mean that where we are right now is the only
possible outcome.
The only possibility. That's an idea that I have, is we think that because I have a phone, because I can communicate with AI right now, that everything we've done to this point has been the perfect path.
Yeah.
To this point, but it's not. I don't think it's true at all. Yeah.
I mean, you look at your own life and you can see that, you've done some things that were good decisions. You've made lots of mistakes as well, and you kind of end up where you are, and it's a bit of an average of everything. And you scale that up over,
billions of people.
Yeah, and over like the entire length of history. And that's what we are. We're just, we kind of, as a species, we got to where we got to because we did a bunch of stuff, and some of it worked and some of it was an epic fail. And
yeah, but also you couldn't go back. Like, as soon as you go a direction, you can't suddenly go, oh, let's go back.
That's what I mean. Like in life, you make you massively screw something up, and it's like, I can't undo it. I've done it now. I am where I am. So I have to keep moving forward and try and make the next decision a good one. But I can't undo the one I've already done. And I think that's what humanity is. It's just a giant life. Yeah.
Well, what a mess we got ourselves into.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm gonna go off on a bit of a tangent here, because I
go off on tangents. That is a thing that I do. You go for it.
I'm a big fan of the Hopi Native Americans, and their cosmology talks about the 7 worlds, and basically how humanity it's going through a process of 7 worlds, and we're currently in the 4th world. Well, currently they believe that we're basically at the end of the 4th world, so we're just over halfway. But at the end of each world, for one reason or another, it gets to the point where humanity has been, well, at the beginning of each world, essentially, humanity is put on Earth in one way or another, and we are given
World 1.
Like World 1, we're put here, and we're given everything that we need to succeed, but we're also given free will, and it's like a simulation, really. I mean, it's kind of a simulation theory, and it's like, okay, go, and we're left to our own devices to do our thing. There's a bit of guidance from the spirits and so on, but we have free will to choose whether we take that guidance or not. And at some point, we royally screw it up. And when we royally screw it up in worlds 1, 2, and 3, the creator basically said, okay, this has gone far enough. And the creator destroys the world. It takes a few of the best humans, as in the purest of heart, somehow saves them in some sort of thing that sounds a bit like Noah's Ark, interestingly. And then puts them back on the Earth, like basically resets the game and says, okay, we're going to try again. Learn from your mistakes, try again. And then they go in a different direction, exactly as you're saying. Like, we could have gone in any direction. Then they go in a different direction, and then they make completely different but equally epic mistakes. And then the creator's like, oh, for God's sake, guys, like, I'm going to have to put it all back in the box, and then we'll play again tomorrow.
What were these mistakes? What was the... Did they describe them? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like, I can't remember how the first world ended, but the second world, I think they invented trade, and then they ended up like basically like getting greedy and like fighting with each other because they wanted more material things.
Well, that's something that we've invented in 3 and 4 as well, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, once the idea's in our heads, right, we start to get it out. And then the third world, I think, was destroyed because we invented these like advanced technologies that allowed us to like fly around the world and sort of exploit each other, and you sort of do these. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, look, Hopi cosmology is, in general, a bit vague, and I'm not going to claim I'm a world expert on it, but that's the gist. The fourth world, which we're currently in, there's a whole series of prophecies around what will happen as we approach the end of the fourth world, and most of those prophecies have now happened. So that hence they believe that we're nearly there. But it's a bit vague, I mean, as to like how they think this one will end, and what does an end mean, right? Does an end mean that we transition to a new phase of humanity? Because that also ties in with like the ancient Indian beliefs around what are called the yugas, which is like the ages. These are sort of like, you know, there's just debate over how long they are, but we're talking sort of tens of thousands of years. And we go through a process of like the 4 ages, which culminates in the golden age. It's like we figured it out now. So, and similarly, the Hopi thing is like we're just over halfway at the end of the fourth world.
They know. But how can they know that there's? I mean, it's been ordained that there is 7. So fate exists. We know what happened. We're just letting you experience it.
Exactly. It's just you got to go through. You got to go through the process. So I think the idea is that basically by the end of the 7th world, we'll have had enough runs through it to have figured this out, and we'll be like, okay, we learned from our mistakes. We figured out how to live harmoniously. Whatever that means, whatever that looks like.
I think I've told you this before. It's like I think The Matrix was not a film. It was not a sci-fi film. It was a documentary.
Yeah.
There's so many things about that is like, or maybe they took the inspiration for the film of the Hopi and kind of multiple other kind of areas there. But you know, there's the whole idea of we're constantly reaching a state of evolution, and then we're being reset. Matrix is not because we learned our lesson, just because we'll always break out the box, and therefore they'll just give us a way to break out the box and put us back in again. But like there's also like lots of other kind of, it could also be expressing, you know, past cataclysms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you know, past cataclysms, like for whatever reason. It's just ancient memory being passed down through a narrative structure, which you're not going to tell your kids, you know, you're not going to read research papers to them at 2 a.m. You're going to tell them like these stories about worlds and things like that.
And it ties in because, you know, you've got the Younger Dryas period about 11,000 years ago, where there's some sort of great flood event that wiped out huge parts of humanity.
You're gonna get the comments now, Tom. You're gonna get the
Well, the
comments.
Hopi believe that the third world ended with a Great Flood.
A great flood. Well,
Yeah,
like, the whole great flood is kind of like there's so many different examples of it in different cultures that there is
yeah,
this like flood event.
yeah. And whether it's the Younger Dryas or not, it kind of doesn't matter. The point is just that there may well have been. Well, even if the Hopi are completely wrong, it kind of doesn't matter. It's symbolic that
Well, it's
we go through a
yeah.
process as humanity of learning from our mistakes, and that our goal is to get ourselves to the point where we've learned enough to actually live well on this earth.
Just diving into the flood thing again because I just want to thought because there's okay, just for everybody listening, there is this kind of hypothesis that, there was a big flood event, like 10,000, 11,000 years ago,
Yeah, about 11,000, I think.
coinciding, yeah. And so, like, the criticism of this when you dive into it is that if you actually look at the geological evidence, it wasn't like a flood. It was a significant rising in sea levels, but potentially over like 100, maybe 200 years, rather than
Yeah,
instant, which is kind of what some of the narrative of some of the people is. And so like, "Oh, there wasn't a great flood, it took 100 years." Then I think about that, and I'm thinking, come on, if 100 years is a lifetime. So like during like a lifetime of a human being, they saw waters rise to such a point that entire civilizations were just submerged. Okay, yes, it might have happened like, 10 centimeters a year, but it happened like pretty fast. And so, you wouldn't tell your children in the stories, hey, it took a long time, but, it eventually got flooded. You would say, like, there was a great flood and everybody, eventually the narrative would change. But my God, like 100 years or even 200 years is significantly, it's very fast. It's fast for that to be like a shocking event for society and cultures and everything that's going on, enough to have this kind of narrative, told in a different way, these myths told in a different way to children, then it kind of gets passed along. Famously, kind of like what we're talking about these days as well. It's like climate change, everything. It's a slow event. I
right,
mean, in terms,
exactly.
it's not an asteroid hitting the Earth. It will take hundreds of years, but maybe in 1,000 years there'll be myths of the Great Flood of the early 2000s, which took like 100, 200, 300 years to kind of actually manifest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And yeah, I've got this book here actually, Mercia Iliad, Myths, Dreams, and Mysteries, and it talks a lot about like how mythology was actually the main way of telling what happened in the past until very, very recently, and how it's like history, but it's fundamentally different from history, because history is about trying to document all the events of what happened in detail and know all of the facts, and we're obsessed with that in our current
Well, you only
civilization.
know the facts that were written by the winners.
Right, exactly. But we want to think that we know the facts, whereas mythology is actually about making sure that the lessons actually can travel through the generations, and they don't care about the details. The details don't really matter. What matters is that you learn from what happened, and you tell it in a way that's a compelling story, that's actually something that people want to keep repeating, and it's easy for them to remember because it's a great story.
Yeah. Well, that's how
And
you would teach. That's
yeah,
literally how if I had a lesson to teach my kids, I would craft a narrative around it with actually I do that already. I make up stories with dragons and things to teach them lessons
right,
because they're not going to listen to the lessons, are they? They're going to listen to a story about a dragon.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like Peter and the Wolf, there probably wasn't actually a guy called Peter who had this event with
Yeah.
a wolf, but
Yeah.
it's a powerful, simple, emotive story that teaches us a great lesson.
Well,
Yeah.
what does it tell us about
What
sustainability?
does it tell us about sustainability? Well, I guess the point is that we shouldn't ignore myths as
Yeah.
as um as just silly stories from primitive people in the past. We should look at them more as a very effective, powerful communication technique to pass down important information from previous generations, and whether that important information is that, hey, there was a great flood and you should just be aware that these sorts of things happen, or whether it's something more specifically a kind of moral tale or something, that we should not be so arrogant as to think they're just silly stories. We should see what we can learn from them. Yeah. And I think the Hopi one's interesting, similarly to the sort of the Indian cycle of the yugas, because it does tell this story of humanity goes through phases, a bit like we go through in life. And we're trying to progress towards something better, but that's not necessarily going to be like, it's not like we're going to get there next year, like probably not even in our lifetime, but we're on this, but it's a process. And it's a bit like what you were saying right at the beginning about the direction that power is flowing. It's like, it's not a destination. It's a, yeah, exactly. And it's about which way are we putting the energy, and are we moving? Oh, if we're moving in the right direction, then in a way, that's all we need to worry about, right?
One of the things the mythology is telling us is that there are, or there have been, historically throughout the earth, like deep cataclysmic events, right? And so, like, this is, I've wrote it in my article that I've not released, but this whole idea about being resilient,
Yeah.
right? About being resilient. I mean, that's one of my other things about being, what does sustainability mean to me? It's about living, not only understanding that we're part of this ecosystem, but this ecosystem has evolved, this way of living has evolved over billions of years to survive. Not just yourselves, this isn't just an individual thing, but for life as a whole to survive on a planet, which is such an unbelievably rare occurrence. It's so rare. So, I mean, one of the things I think about it is, like, for instance, there's a cataclysm on the Earth, like I forgot the name of it, the one that wiped off 96% of all life on the planet. Whatever our system is allowed life to actually then flourish again, right? The diversity of life on this planet means that no matter what we get hit by, there will be some way of dealing with it so life fundamentally, continues to exist on this planet. And some of my one of my deep concerns with sustainable, like one of there's this kind of idea that's expressed, especially by this class of people, which I don't like talking about a class of people, but these extremely, I don't think it's fair just to say it's expressed by them, but there is this belief that life on this planet is here simply and solely so that humanity, as a jumping off point for humanity, it's here. Like the way we even treat fossil fuels. I mean, if you think about if we just say fossil fuels is an energy store that took the Earth billions of years to store. The reason fossil fuels are so powerful is because over billions of years, we have compressed energy into this extremely small thing. And you look at all of the success, everything around us, and I know people like, we love to rail about fossil fuels. We would not be here today. You and I would not be talking on a whatever this is, if it wasn't for the power concentrated in this fossil fuel, which in a way, we kind of like, okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Earth, for saving all this energy for billions and billions of years. We're going to burn it now. In about 200 years, you've deposited into the bank account for 1 billion years. We're now going to party on for 200 years and just have a great time. And fingers crossed, by the end of it, we're going to end somewhere where we won't need those fossil fuels anymore. I mean, who's to say that in like 1,000 years, we won't look back at this time going, I can't believe they were burning it. Are they nuts? Do they not understand the other properties of this magical material? They just burnt it, those idiots. And now they're like spending, 1 centimeter cubed of oil in like like 2,000 years is worth like an unbelievable. I can't believe they burnt it. So like, there's this idea that we just everything around us, all of nature, is just here for us just to spend like a bank account. I think they say is to evolve us to a better state, but I don't think it is. It's just to have a big party and just like live like a really great lifestyle, and it's just hand waved that we're actually going to end up in
Yeah.
a better place. Although I think it's there's a lot of we have to steel man. We always have to steel man other people's arguments. There's a solid argument to say that without fossil fuels, we would have a huge amount of poverty still on this planet.
Yeah.
But I don't want to end on that point. I don't want that clipped.
No,
Say something.
well, that's fine. I'll pick it up. Because I I think we have an unhealthy relationship with fossil fuels, and I mean that not just in the terms of it's unhealthy because we're addicted to them and we're burning too much of them, but I also think it's unhealthy emotionally in terms of how we vilify them, when actually we have so much to be grateful for in our daily lives. All of us have, like, we would not have the lives we have if it wasn't for humanity's ability or humanity's decision to harness those fuels in the ground. I think, and that there could be an argument to say that actually there was always going to come a point at some point, whether it's now or in 1,000 years or 10,000 years from now, there's always going to come a point at which humans looked at these things under the ground and said, they could be really useful. What should we do with them? And it just so happens that that was around now. But the problem is that that might not have been an issue if we'd looked at them for what they are, which is finite and potentially and hazardous, right?
Yeah.
And said, okay, look, they're finite and hazardous, but they're super useful. And the goal of us is to get us to a point, as a society where we have all of our needs met, we can live safe, comfortable lives where everybody has food and water and shelter and so on. And we need to get there somehow. And these things are going to be really useful in helping us get there. And we look at them in that way, then I think it could be an amazing thing. And we still, we've done a lot of damage, but we still could reframe our perspective on them to say, okay, they're a catalyst to the next evolution of society. But we're not really doing that in a healthy way, in a planned way. Exactly. It's like that. Obviously, we talk about trying to develop renewable energy and so on, but that's generally spoken of in a very adversarial way, that it's sort of fighting against the fossil fuels without recognizing that actually even those things are dependent on fossil fuels for their creation.
Don't get me started on our. That's one of the Faustian bargains we're making. Is we're saying we're making one set of energy companies powerful over another set of energy companies with this unwritten social contract that if a better solution appeared, that these new energy companies would then, mea culpa, just go, fine, we'll stop existing. So now we won't actively lobby against this, like fusion energy. We won't actively lobby against fusion energy comes along. What a battle that's going to be.
Yeah.
What a battle that's going to be. Like all the wind and solar is going to have to go away, and they're going to fight this battle against fusion, despite the fact that fusion may very well be the best solution. So I think we're making that kind of bargain. But there was another point. I'm keeping losing track of the points.
Well, there's the flow of power thing as well, which comes back into it. And I think renewables have always been interesting in the sense that they have the potential to be very distributed and give people a lot of control over their own energy supply, essentially. That, in reality hasn't panned out in a mass sense. Really, there's lots of reasons for that, but they're less concentrated in theory, but maybe not in practice. Yeah.
I just remembered what I was going to say. Can I dive in?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's because of your point. Because how do you reframe fossil fuels? I remember there was when I first started in the space, I used to give my early talks. I used to talk about this concept. I did the maths, and I figured out, from like when you take a barrel, the literal energy from a barrel of oil that comes out of the ground, how much of that energy is lost by the time you move a car with the energy. And I did like there was all these reports, and basically you lose a significant amount just turning that from raw oil into refined. I've forgotten all the numbers. You lose a lot more because then you have to, it's heavy, so you got to transport it different parts of the world. You lose a lot in a combustion engine because I think these things are only like really, I think it's about 20% efficient at turning the actual potential energy of
I think a
petrol
good
into.
combustion engine is maybe somewhere like 30-ish% efficient.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
then, I mean, you're still losing 70%, but then you've got all the inefficiency of the drivetrain and everything.
all of that.
Yeah.
So it's about 8% in the end. So you're losing 92% of the energy in the oil by the time you're moving things. Whereas the difference between the electrical system is that you actually lose very little waste as you're transporting electricity over wires, even though long distance wise, about 2% energy loss, and EV engines about 80% efficient at turning the actual energy into motion. So the argument I was making, it was an interesting argument I was making at the time. I was like, well, if we had actually evolved a very different system for fossil fuels, where it was like 90% efficient, our whole relationship with fossil fuels, I think today would be very, very different to, perhaps very different to what it was. It was a question of waste. It was a question of we're very willing to waste, chuck gases in the atmosphere, all it is just to get. But think about the value it provided to humanity. Like we're willing to waste all of that for an 8%.
Yeah. Even 8% is so
even 8% is so
life-changing.
valuable so life-changing. And so, yeah, I think we could have had a very different relationship to this whole industry. But I think again, it kind of goes back to my point about think about, how about this as a thought experiment? If the decision for how to extract, refine, use, consume fossil fuels was one that was made by the masses versus the few, what decisions would we have made? I do believe that if these decisions were made by, if it was a consensus view of like everybody in the UK were like, well, this is actually how we want to use fossil fuels. We want to use it for this, this, and this. We want to make sure cars are this efficient. We only want to have this much extracted from the ground. I think we would have made better. I think in aggregate, I do believe this, we would make better decisions for ourselves than if we left those decisions to the few people in power, and then they want to basically then keep on concentrating power into themselves so they can make better decisions for them rather than for us.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I don't think what I'm describing is sustainability, but I do think every time I think through these issues, then I ask myself the question, well, if that spectrum was different, if that balance was different, would we have made different decisions? And I'm like, yeah, we would have.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where like you said, we could have gone in any direction. There's an infinite number of possibilities of where humanity could have ended up. And there's equally an infinite number of possibilities as to where we can go from here. And I think that, for me, is one of the things that's slightly disturbing about where the kind of mainstream sustainability narrative has got to, for me, is that it's got to a point where it seems to be telling us that basically there's one outcome and we're all screwed. And maybe there's another outcome, which is that we're like semi-screwed.
We can only be, to be semi-screwed, we have to then hand over more levers of power and control.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's very limiting. It's very limiting in terms of just allowing our imaginations to contemplate how the world could be. And to give some context to this, we think we know what the world is going to look like sort of by 2100 or something. But if you look back in time to people in the past, and you imagine, like, if you could go back in time and tell them about everything, tell them about the world that you live in today, you
I
wouldn't need to go.
sometimes think about growing up,
Yeah, right. Even
like
things we have today
knowing,
that, like,
yeah,
if you told us when we were kids, you'd be like, "What? I'm gonna have like this, like a TV in my hand that like
yeah,
doesn't have any wires and I can watch it anywhere."
yeah. I speak to it. I just speak to my house all the time, you know?
Yeah, it just
Yeah,
speaks to my house.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But if you went back even like 150 years and you told people about this world, they would think you were off your head crazy.
yeah. Absolutely.
And I mean, we've got like houses in the like that fly. You know, it's like, 777 is like, it's like a
Oh, right,
giant
yeah.
office building with wings that can fly
Yeah.
thousands of miles. I mean, they would have been like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, even the Wright brothers were considered crazy, and they were just trying to get like a tiny thing with one person just to literally
Yeah,
just
yeah,
stay in the air for a few seconds.
yeah, yeah,
And now, yeah, we've got all this insane technology, and I mean, like the atom bomb. I mean, there's good things, there's bad things, but like if you told people 150 years ago, they would not have believed any of it. They would have thought you were off this planet. And I think the same is true if we look forwards. I think if we look forwards 150 years, so 2175, I think that any prediction we make about what the world is going to be like is going to be like way off the mark. And that's okay. I don't think that's a problem. But I think that the acknowledgement that we're way off the mark is helpful in order to allow us to open our minds to the infinite possibilities ahead of us and actually start trying to figure out better ways of living, rather than just feeling like, oh, the system we've got is kind of what we've got, and maybe we can tweak it around the edges a bit and maybe like soften the rough edges. But we're kind of just stuck with it. If we actually said, well, we're not stuck with it. I mean, we just kind of got here, and like against all odds, literally against all odds, we ended up where we are. So wherever we want to go, against all odds, maybe we could if we actually allowed ourselves to believe it.
yeah. I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I think we've both been on paths where we can expand our thinking beyond what we're presented, and can see that actually no, this isn't the only option that's available to us. And this is one of the things I say is I realized recently, like we talk about mitigation and adaptation. We talk about mitigation and adaptation, and really, like I realized, the key form of adaptation we need is just adapting our systems, because as you say, everything's going to change. The game is going to change every 5 years now for the next, hundreds or so years. So we're not predicting 100 years. We don't know what's going to be out there. But if we don't adapt our systems of governance, for decision making, for all of these things, we're just bound to make the same mistakes, despite how the chessboard evolves. We'd always make the wrong move, because actually ultimately our methods of governance and the methods of making decisions are wrong. And I go back to my point again, is it's all about it, without acknowledging the fact that there is this dynamic of concentration and dilution of power. However the chessboard changes, however you're thinking, we're constantly giving up power to a few players, and they're always making decisions which benefit them and don't benefit society. And that's no, I don't mean that from like a cabal, like evil, cruel way. I just think that's just how the system, it's just how the game is played. There's no, if you and
Yeah.
me had lived different lives, if we had been born into these kind of families and situations and wealth and all and opportunities, we may very well be playing a game very differently to what we're playing right now. Like it could just be an accident of our birth. And so that's kind of like one of the ways kind of look at it. And then if we think about adaptation in that way, you've got to look at mitigation in a slightly different way as well. Because mitigation could also be um just everything you need to my mind really wanted to go on a tangent for a second. Allow me. I read a really good book recently called The Book of Five Rings. Have you heard of The Book of Five Rings? No, it's brilliant, mate. It's a Japanese sword master from the 17th century. It's like a samurai Ronin. Oh, that's so cool, right? And at age 60, I'm just going to write down everything I know about basically killing people with sharp things. But the way the book's written is it's like every sentence is like something you contemplate, and it kind of has a broader like meaning. And he says like everything I'm teaching you in this book to kill one opponent is what you would use for an army to beat another army. And there's like one sentence there that just floored me, and I just stopped reading and I just started thinking about it for ages. And he was talking about when someone's attacking you, like what if you've got a sword and I've got a sword and you're waving around and I'm waving around, like what do I do? And he says, block your enemy's useful moves, but allow him his useless moves. Block your enemy's useful moves, but allow him his useless moves. And I just sat and I read that and I was like, Jesus, that's a whole movement.
Yeah.
We've been blocked our useful moves, and we're allowed our useless moves. So when I think of mitigation, I just think of mitigation what have we been allowed in mitigation? What are we allowed to have a conversation about? It's all the useless things. It's all the things which doesn't challenge power. It doesn't challenge the very... We can do mitigation as long as the power systems are not challenged and they just remain in place. That's the kind of how I feel about that whole, Yeah.
And I think that ties in with the thing about the powerful interests not necessarily having a malevolent agenda in the sense that like they want bad things to happen to people. It's more just that they're just protecting their own power. And if our move is like to make life better for people, like ordinary people, in a way that doesn't challenge their power, they're like, yeah, sure, have it. You know, it makes you guys happy. That means that you challenge our power less. Everyone's a winner, you know. And I think there's lots of things like that through history. Like, I don't think we'd have democracy if it wasn't for that kind of dynamic where it's like, yeah, sure. I mean, that may be a controversial one because some people will say that, oh, but that does challenge their power. I'm not sure it does in the way that we think it does. I got to.
Theory. But this is probably where the podcast is going to go off the rails completely.
Yeah.
I have a deep theory that I think democracy came through our relationship with psychedelics, psychedelic medicine. I don't know if I told you this. So like the way I don't think democracy is a given at all. I think we think of democracy as one of those things, as this like, oh, for society to evolve, at some point they invent democracy, and only through democracy does the next good things happen throughout life. I don't think that at all. I think that democracy is kind of this gift given to us by, I don't know by who or by what or by entities. Oh my God!
But it's a wild anomaly.
It's a wild anomaly. It's a wild. If you look at the birthplace of democracy in Athens in kind of like 200 to like 400 AD, what were they surrounded? They were surrounded by Sparta. We are Sparta. Like this brutally militaristic societies, monarchies, and for people to have gotten together and say, you know what? Maybe that isn't the only way. And I think there's a connection between that. And I will talk, let's not dive into today. I'll lead it for another podcast episode. But there's the Eleusinian Mysteries, which was around the same period of time, not for like 1,500 years. This mystery cult, which every year they would meet in Athens, and it was a super secret cult. It's like Fight Club. You can't talk about Fight Club. So there's very little written about
First rule of Eleusis.
Fight Club of Eleusis. But there's enough like circumstance. There's enough evidence that, and there was a really good book called The Road to Lucius, written by um, Alfred Hoffman. Alfred
Albert
Hoffman?
Hoffman. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Albert
The guy who
Hoffman,
invented LSD.
LSD,
Yeah.
that talks about how he believes, and I think there's a bunch of other researchers, that it was some sort of LSD analog they were taking in those times. So all the famous like philosophers like Aristotle, all these people went through the mystery cult and had this deep psychedelic experience. And I just can't go out of my head that this one part of the world that was exploring kind of psychedelics, it as a deep spiritual awakening of a human being, the pinnacle of their existence. Like every year you would be initiated into the mystery cult, just so happened to be the place where democracy was born,
Yeah.
surrounded with all of this other democratic stuff, and was quite successful for a couple of 100 years. So,
And the weird
so yeah,
thing is that
yeah,
their democracy was actually more radical than ours. If they saw our democracy, they would say, no, you've not.
that's not democracy.
That's not democracy.
It's an oligarchy. We live in oligarch.
Yeah.
We live in
So
oligarch.
they were
plutocracy.
more. I mean, they had negative things about the society that we have progressed beyond.
Yeah.
They had slaves and things like that. But in terms of the actual governing principles, they were more advanced than where we are now.
It was called. I think it's interesting because when you look at political theorists now, they call it radical democracy. They call what was there radical democracy, and they call what we have now democracy.
Yeah.
And I often think, like, hang on, like, you're using the word. I don't think the word radical really has like a technical definition here. It just means the crazy democracy,
Yeah.
not the good democracy we have now. So, but the why it was radical was because there was no political class, there were no politicians. Every single person in the city had the right to go to debate, to raise issues, and they'd be like up to 6,000 people in these kind of assemblies, like shouting and screaming, which apparently was a nightmare, but still better than the alternative.
And as I understand it, you couldn't be a career politician, right? All of the bureaucrats were basically selected from the population. They did it for a few years, and then they could never do it again. It's sort of
there was the assembly, which was kind of like anybody could just go. Anybody from the city could go and shout and scream and raise their points. I'm sure there are people who are somehow better at orating than others. I don't know. I'm sure there was some sort of hierarchy that developed. But then there was a council, and the council were like 500 people that were randomly selected
like jury
from
service.
the population. Yeah, like jury service. They were randomly selected. And a lot of kind of decision making on like agenda setting and stuff happened from the council. And there's only ever like a 1 or 2 year term, and you could never do it twice in a row. Then there were these kind of like certain elected positions, but they were only elected. There were only like the council and the assembly had like some sort of relationship, and they could only keep their period for some period of time. And I look at that and I'm like we're told these days like we can't have that. I'm like,
yeah,
it was working.
Yeah,
like these days we can't have. We have to have like we couldn't possibly discuss these issues ourselves. We're not clever enough to have these kinds of conversations. We have to hire these expert politicians who may or may not, and often don't, actually follow through on what they told you on the doorstep.
Well, and not just that, but we're told we're not clever enough to debate these issues, and yet the politicians in many cases are completely unqualified for the jobs that they're doing. You know, you make somebody Minister of Health, they have no background in health whatsoever. You know, Minister of Education, and it's like, well, what do they know about? Okay, they went to Eton, but like, what more do they know
Eton
about
seems to be
actually educating people?
Do you know how? I don't know if you know. This blew my mind. Do you know how actual voting works in the UK Parliament? Do you know the actual mechanism of voting?
You mean when they do a parliamentary vote on like a bill or something?
Yeah. Do you know the actual mechanism?
Not the mechanism, no.
Oh my God, this is so crazy. So you see the pictures where it's kind of got there's two, but they're kind of like on what do you call it, on a slant, right? Underneath both those sides is a corridor,
Okay.
right? So when you want to vote on an issue, there's an ayes corridor and a nays corridor. You physically have to get out and walk into the corridor, and your presence in the corridor denotes if you voted one way or the other. So
That it.
that is so
They never
when they
show
say
that
the
bit
eye,
on BBC
they never
Parliament
show that
channel, do
bit.
they?
They never show that bit. So when they say the ayes have it, they mean they've counted the people in that corridor, right? And there's so many cases of like there's cases like people like being like unsure which side to vote, and there's someone just grabbing them and dragging them into the corridor. I mean, I'm not talking hundreds of, I'm talking years ago, like
Yeah.
for like Brexit votes and things like that. And people who, if you're not physically present, you can't vote. So there's people who were like, there's cases where like they were, they cared so much about this vote, they were in hospital and they dragged their hospital bed over to the corridor to make sure that they could actually vote on an issue. This is politics. This is what we've been sold these days as the system of governance that we, at the UK at least, that we are. This is it. We couldn't possibly. You guys can't possibly discuss the complexity of these issues and have these kind of votes and arrangements that we have. We have to physically walk into a corridor. I mean,
Yeah. You guys aren't capable of that.
you guys aren't capable of this.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's and all of our bills, environmental bills, everything will just happen in this ridiculous manner.
Yeah. I mean, I think that to me, it highlights, again, this thing about the world of possibilities that we have in front of us. The Greeks came up with a system that was more sophisticated in terms of distributing power than what we have. But that was only just one way. It's not like, they had figured it out and it was perfect. It just shows that other options are available. Whereas we're always given this choice of like, well, if you don't want democracy, that means you want communism. And it's like hang on, like we haven't really defined either. Like, and what about
better?
Yeah. It's like, no, we just want a better system. We can make up a new name for it. And then we'll find all the problems with that, and then we'll iterate again.
Yeah. So I think it's just I come back again and again to like, I don't know what sustainability is, really. I just know what we need to get there, perhaps, or I just believe I know what we need to get there.
Yeah. So to sort of bring it to a bit of a close, would it be fair to say that in your belief in the idea of sustainability, whatever that means, there is within it a belief that there should be a greater flow of power distributed towards the general population, and that power should flow more in that direction. That in itself is rooted in a care for human beings, regardless of who they are.
If I may, I might just phrase that a little bit.
Yeah.
I would say, if the population as a whole were truly given the chance to decide their future and how they wanted to treat the planet and how they wanted to treat the earth that we're living on, and made decisions that we would say is not sustaining, burn all the oil, do all of this, destroy it, I'd have to sit back and go, all right then.
Yeah.
Like you've had, I just feel like we've never really been given the chance to decide
what's best
how
for
we
us.
want to live. Yeah, what's best for us.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. I think that's a good place to wrap it up for today.
All right. Well, brilliant. Great chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I should just say, for anyone listening, if you want to share your perspectives on anything we've talked about, and particularly what sustainability means to you and why. In the comments on Substack, that would be super interesting.
Yeah, and share this podcast. Give us a good rating, or maybe not. I don't know. Just give us some feedback.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
Thanks,
Asim.
See you there. Bye.